Hello and welcome to the Department of Risk and Disaster Reduction monthly events. And today we are looking at gender, disaster and the Sendai Framework, a decade of progress, question mark. And I think that question mark is going to be particularly significant in the conversations we have tonight. As a department, we run monthly events. Some of these are in the evening, some at lunch, some online, and they cover the wide variety of conversations and disciplines that we cover here in the Department of Risk and Disaster Reduction at UCL. So welcome to the series. We encourage our panel members to debate, and then we encourage questions from the floor at the end as well. So I hope you will all have an exciting evening. I also want to draw your attention to some future events coming up. In particular, we have Shams, who is going to be giving his professorial inaugural lecture on how data-driven science transforms lives, a spotlight on water security. And if it's anything like any of the other topics I've heard him talk about, it's going to be incredibly interesting. He teaches our students, and every time I sit there and just learn so much about really impactful and important work. So I'm really excited for his lecture. And we also have our annual conference coming up, which is Where is the Human in Humanitarianism, which, given what things are going on in the world in the humanitarian sector, I think will be particularly poignant and provide some important questions, possibly some solutions, and possibly some other interesting conversations as well. So I hope you're all available for that over in UCL East. So I'm Joanna Ford-Walker, Head of Department here at Risk and Disaster Reduction, and it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to the team organising tonight. Thank you to all those who are speaking, particularly to our guest speakers and to our friends, and also to those behind the scenes making tonight happen. A big thank you. But at that point, I will hand over. So thank you to Alain.
Thank you. My name is Ilan Kelman. I'm half here at the Department of Risk and Disaster Reduction and half at the UCL Institute for Global Health. The idea being to connect disasters and health. One international document, one international agreement, which brings those two together, is a Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which was launched, which was agreed 10 years ago today. And in the last 2 hours, this special journal issue for the International Journal of Disaster Risk Science has been published, looking at the 10th anniversary, the 10 years of the Sendai Framework. Notice that I said looking at. I didn't say celebrating, nor did I say commiserating about, because that's what the question is. Should we be wishing a happy birthday? Should we be saying, look at all the exciting results from it, how wonderful? Or should we be saying, you know what, we've actually just wasted 10 years and these international agreements don't do anything? But as always, it's not one or the other. It's a combination of both. And being in the university, being academics, our job is absolutely to critique, not criticize, but critique, which means constructive criticism, what could and should be improved, as well as thinking about what went right, what is exciting, what really worked. And the papers in this special journal issue cover all of them. Some of them are about specific places, geographic. Some are about specific sectors. Others are about specific ideas. And we do have one author here tonight who looked at one specific aspect of the Sendai Framework, critiquing what was good, what was bad. And this special journal issue is part of the series. So I co-edited one 10 years ago for the birth of the Sendai Framework. As it was being signed, we published it. And then I edited another special journal issue 5 years ago for Sendai +5. So guess what? We're now thinking about 2030, 15 years, when the Sendai Framework should have solved all disaster risk reduction problems. And I can see from your faces that you believe that's actually going to happen. And that our speakers are going to examine that. How useful or less than useful is the Sendai Framework? What could and should we have done better? Where do we go from here, not only on the 10th birthday, but thinking for the next 5 years while the framework is in force, and of course, far, far beyond. This is only one of 2 launches for the special issue. The next one will be on the 15th of April in Melbourne at Monash University. So there is an advertisement for that. And like this one, it will be recorded so you can catch up with it and contribute. In theory, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is for us and about us. In practice, well, our panel will let us know, just as these articles do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you all for being here and joining us today to celebrate the 7th anniversary of the Center for Gender and Disaster and 10th anniversary of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which Ilan nicely introduced. So before I invite our speakers to give their talks, I just wanted to briefly talk about the Center for Gender and Disaster. Many of you may already know what the Center for Gender and Disaster is, but I just thought, let me just quickly give you a very brief introduction. So the Center for Gender and Disaster is one of the research centers of our department, Department of Risk and Disaster Reduction. There is also a humanitarian institute. There is also another center called DPHE, Digital Public Health. And there are several research groups as well within the department. So because we are such an interdisciplinary department, we work on different themes. So we are also getting together as a team and forming our own research groups or being part of these, associating ourselves with some of the centers we have. Center for Gender and Disaster was launched in March, on the 7th of March in 2018. So this is the 7th year. I joined the center soon after it was launched. So within a month, I joined. It was a very small team, Professor Maureen Fordham and myself. Of course, we had lots of support from the department, but two of us actually started this center. And since then, within a very short period of time, we made a lot of progress. We got lots of projects and did a lot of wonderful things. So I'll briefly present that. My name is Poonam Yadav. I'm associate professor in the department. I'm co-director of the Center for Gender and Disaster and director of the Humanitarian Institute as well, which I recently took over. And we are trying to reorganize ourselves within the Humanitarian Institute. This is a pan-UCL kind of institute, so we'll have participation from the entire UCL community or as much as possible. And we have this exciting annual conference that Joey just mentioned in July. So I hope you'll start registering for that conference too. It's free to attend and it's going to be an exciting, eventful day. So like 1st of July. So because we are celebrating the kind of 7th anniversary of the center, I just wanted to say that the center was established to develop awareness of and responsiveness to gender consideration in the context of risk, disasters, and conflict through our excellence in research and teaching. So as I said earlier, we were a small team and then we were very successful with research grants. So the first one was GRIP. It's called GRIP, but the full form is Gender Responsive, I forget myself, Resilience, Intersectionality and Policy and Practice. But then GRIP is very, very easy to say. It's a long name. That project was actually a 5 million UKRI project, and it was implemented in 3 different regions. So South Asia, Latin America, and Africa. And then we also had 2 other projects. So our team really grew quite big. And we had lots of activities going on. But then slowly the projects are now finishing and we will now really need to have more projects basically. I wanted to, before I go to the website of this group and show you what are the things that you can look for and learn about the project itself, these are some of the resources that you might find useful. So if you are already working on gender and disaster, or if you have started to work on gender and disaster, or if you want to introduce yourself to this field, there are 2 reference guides. These are freely available for anybody to download and read. And there are lots of resources really put there under different themes. So depending on the theme you're interested in, you can find lots of literature there. There are other 2 reference guides too. One is on gender intersectionality and resilience, and there is one on gender and sexual minorities in disaster risk reduction. We also put together this chapter for Oxford bibliographies. This is a chapter, basically a combination of all of that. So yeah, and then just wanted to have a look at the GRIP website. So the project has its own website, and you'll see what the project is about, who were involved, where the projects were implemented, and there are lots of resources. If you go to the resources site there are lots of resources, the newsletter, the report, publications, and so on and so forth. So just need to say, kind of Google GRRIPP. There is another one, GRIPP. That's something else. This one is GRRIPP. And you'll see all of the resources and things here. So with this, I would just like to say that the page is up for the annual conference. Please register when you can. Since I also mentioned the Humanitarian Institute, we will have lots of activities coming up in the future. Keep an eye out for that as well. And now I would like to invite our first speaker, who has traveled all the way from Japan to share his research with us. Thank you so much, Professor Tatsuki, for coming. So I'm going to introduce you and then hand it over to you. So Professor Shigeo Tatsuki is a distinguished and very well-known scholar from Japan. He is a disaster sociologist who has been working on long-term disaster recovery for vulnerable population since the 1995 Kobe earthquake. His work includes longitudinal recovery surveys, contributing to inclusive disaster policy and organizing international studies following the 2011 GEJ earthquake, so Great East Japan earthquake. His work has been widely recognized worldwide in social science and disaster resilience. So may I now hand this over to you, Professor Tatsuki, for your contribution, and you'll have 10 minutes. Maximum I can give you is 15. Thank you. Yes.
Right. That's fine. Okay. Thank you. Oh. Do you hear me? Oh, no. Is my time wasted? Included? No. Hello. Hello. Maybe we could use pronounce. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. This is it. Okay. Thank you. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for a kind introduction, Professor Poonam. I'm Shigeo Tatsuki, and I'm very happy to share the kind of achievement and progress that Japan made after 2015 Sendai Framework. Professor Hellman stressed the power of critical thinking, but I would focus more on, during my presentation, the implementation part of the Sendai Framework. In Sendai Framework of disaster risk reduction, the red words were stressed. They all the society, engagement, and partnership, and empowerment, inclusive, accessible, things like that. Okay, and the main part is in the priority 4, empowering women and persons with disability is very, very important to achieve this goal. This was the document that was released in 2015, And I will just show you the first conclusion, what Japan did. In 2021, Japanese Disaster Countermeasure Act, Countermeasure Basic Act was amended and demanded every single municipality, which is more than 1,700, they were mandated to make an effort to provide individualized evacuation plan. And I was partly involved in this amendment, and I'll show you what are the empirical basis for the government to institutionalize the direction for the inclusive disaster risk reduction. 2011 Great East Japan earthquake killed more than 18,000 people. And it took almost a year for the National Police Agency to provide the fatality data. And there are 31 municipalities that where more than 10 people were killed. And because we knew the 31 municipalities, my colleague asked each one municipality to ask how many people with disabilities died. And then we obtained two sets of data. On your horizontal axis, that's the general population fatality. Vertical axis is the data we obtained in terms of the fatality, especially among the people with disability. And three lines are the regression line for each of the three prefectures. And you assume that if the line is 45-degree angle, that means it's far. And as you see, the red line shows that nearly twice as many people with disability died due to the tsunami, where it is Miyagi Prefecture, where Sendai is located. What made the difference? And I came up with two conclusions, but the first one is very, very paradoxical. This is the data. The vertical axis shows the proportion of people with disability with severe impairment. How many of them were institutionalized? And Miyagi is very, very low in terms of institutionalization. And this is not by chance. It is because of the very progressive normalization policy and the provision of the independent living services only in Miyagi. However, these advanced normalization policies were not connected to disaster risk reduction. Therefore, when the moment comes, the tsunami came, lots of people with disability residing in communities were killed. So this is one of the root causes why Miyagi showed much higher proportion of people with disability impact. And next evidence is based on our panel study of the same individual, and we kept using the same life recovery scores, scale. And what we found is very commonsensical. We found the answer, who would suffer more in recovery? And our answer is, those are the ones who have been struggling prior to the incident. There exists pre-existing inequality. The vertical axis in every four graph shows the life recovery score. And two graphs are the top left ones are the ones with mental health issues. And their baseline level is low. So they stagnated from the beginning for 10 years. The right top is those who with physical health issues. Left bottom, those who lost their jobs due to the tsunami outbreak. The right bottom is the single elder, whose recovery score did not differ much for the first 3 waves of panic, but it started going down from the 4th to the 5th wave. So those people, the bottom line tells anyone suffering from inequalities prior to the event will suffer more for longer period of time. That's the one evidence. The second evidence is the second issues. Yes, pre-existing inequality matter, but also what is important is post-event social environmental changes. And this is a schematic result of the panel data analysis. On this side, you have life recovery. And what it shows is that there are 2 paths that will lead you to a sense of normalcy. One path is through alleviating the impact. And the impact can be alleviated by provision of the mental and physical stress management and housing and livelihood. Those would help to alleviate the impact. But that's not the only path. The upper path is more existential. Those who went through calamities, they struggle for the meaning of their life. And the source of the reappraisal comes from community and personal social ties. So this mechanism shows there is a way to assist the impacted survivors, even they are very much disadvantaged, through the provision of tangible resources and also through the provision of social capital. And the key is equity. This graph shows the speed of housing recovery. But horizontal axis is time, and vertical axis is the rate of the housing recovery. On left is the data from Natori and Sendai, and then the curves shows the speed of housing recovery by household size. The sharper the curve means faster in terms of housing recovery. Slower means it took much longer time. Who are they? They are single household. Both in Natori and Sendai, single household took much longer time for housing to be recovered. The right 2 graphs shows the housing recovery speed by gender of the head of the household. Again, women headed household took longer time to recover. However, if you pay attention to Sendai data and Natori city data, in terms of the household size, starting April of 2014, the gap started to shrink. Right and left, and you see, it's 3 o'clock in my time. So Sendai data in terms of the gender gap, it shrunk. What happened? The answer is Sendai City started providing systematic provision of accommodation called disaster case management. And disaster case management alleviated the gaps in terms of household size or in terms of the gender. Equity requires the provision of reasonable accommodation. And this is what the 2021 amendment of the Disaster Countermeasure Business Act demanded. those who are weak, those who are disadvantaged, should be given more accommodation. Now, Noto Peninsula earthquake, I know I'm running out of time. One keyword of this earthquake is the super aging and depopulation. On the right, you'll see a bigger circle centered around the each municipality center part. And old folks tended to reside in the mountainside. And when the earthquake hit, they were gathered to the evacuation center. But the lifeline was severely damaged. It took 3 months until water comes back 100%. And so it was a severe environment. Therefore, there was an improvisation on the side of prefectural government and disaster medical assistance team to conduct a wide area evacuation. That was good. But when they did the wide area evacuation, the thing that was missing is the strategy to bring those people back to their hometown. So quite a few people are still outside of the disaster hit zone. And this is, I thought I have 45 minutes to talk about Noto earthquake, but this is the key slide. For this shrinking population and aging, there is no such a thing as build back better. What you can expect, though, is the smart transformation, transformational adaptation to the new reality. And there is a way to deal with it, but I'm running out of time, so I'm not gonna talk about it. And in response to this Noto earthquake, the cabinet decided to amend the disaster countermeasure basic act again this month, which the basic message is to include social services within the disaster risk reduction framework completely, so that those disadvantaged people would be given individualized case management services, and those services are guaranteed and entitled. And wide area evacuation, in order to bring people back, you still need individualized assistance through the provision of case management. And the third point, who are good at providing case management services? They are in the voluntary sectors. And so the government and voluntary sector collaborations are demanded, and then to strengthen their relationship. I think I ran out of time. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful to see and really exciting to have that expertise from Japan, noting the terrible experiences which your country has gone through, but help to deal with people. And we continue along the theme of what can be done for individuals, for people, locally, with Kristen Guida. And Kristen has long been a supporter of us at UCL, both my departments, talking to our master's students, collaborating with us on research projects, and co-authoring publications, bringing her wealth of expertise as Urban Resilience Manager for the Greater London Authority. Prior to this, she spent 15 years, longer than the Sendai Framework has been around, as a manager of the London Climate Change Partnership. Kristen, thank you so much for supporting us, and we're looking forward to learning from you.
Great, thank you, Ilan. And thanks very much for inviting me as well. It's really nice to be here. I don't have slides. I thought I'd just say a few things, really. I mean, I think I come from the Greater London Authority, so I'm in the London Resilience Unit within the Greater London Authority. I did a quick straw poll a few days ago to find out how many people in our London Resilience Unit had actually heard of the Sendai Framework. Take-up was quite poor, I have to say. It's about 35 or 36 people at this point. And I think it's an interesting one for us. I think, the UK is a signatory to the Sendai Framework. But if you think about like 10 years ago where we were potentially politically, it's not that surprising if it's not necessarily very well embedded. I think, we signed it, but it didn't come with any particular statutory responsibilities or kind of funding with it or roles or or anything that would, that it would take to try to implement that. And, we have our Civil Contingencies Act, which, doesn't really cover prevention. So risk for us is things like flooding or, heat waves or electricity disasters or water disruption and things like that. Those are, kind of the downstream effects, which, and, for which we have sort of technical solutions and we have, policies and programs to prepare for those kinds of things. But the root causes are, much more upstream, as you know, and the Sendai Framework talks about the collective action that is needed to have, coherence across different policy areas to really embed and integrate kind of resilience. It talks about the empowerment of communities, talks about, understanding risk and the knowledge of local communities. But I think when I think about the kind of the way that actually, potentially applies, is it relevant? Once I think about that kind of relevance, all of that is in the Sendai Framework really has that kind of underlying assumption that we kind of as a society recognize and we care about and we prioritize the human costs of risk. That we actually think about, protecting dignity and respecting life and all of those things. And we carry that through, or we try to carry that through to policy and programs. And I'm sorry to say, I don't see that necessarily like where we're at, the realistic kind of version of where we are. And if you think about what's going on in the world at the moment, is, there are some really wild beliefs out there about, how society and how government should run. And I think ideas that we've kind of accepted about how, well, we should be running governments like a business and we should be prioritizing things like cost saving.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where we're at. And that's why here in London, and in the UK, we have buildings that are, surrounded by flammable cladding. And that's why, we have the NHS being cut in the wake of an epidemic. We have, we're not necessarily like making the decisions, we're, that you would expect to see. You don't see that kind of coherence across policy that the kind of partnership approach really requires. And even if you think about some of the conversations, like I come from a climate change adaptation background, but the conversations about risk and resilience finance, there are these conversations going on around sort of green finance and resilience finance. And I have yet to see, even just, I think talking about that kind of shows where the priority lies, and it's not with people. So there's that huge conflict. And we have trouble even kind of enforcing regulations that prevent the kind of, that sort of mess that we're in as far as, greed and corruption and the things that actually drive the decisions that get made. So yeah, we're kind of in, it's very difficult for us to get away from that kind of moral malpractice, let alone aspire to something much greater. And I'm sorry to be a downer about all of that, but with that in mind, we're here, we're having this conversation, and I think that that's what's important. And in London, I think we are trying to kind of move in another direction. I think, I'm not sure how long ago it was now, it might have been around 10 years ago that the Rockefeller Resilient Cities, Rockefeller Foundation launched that Resilient Cities program. London was a beneficiary of that program. It created my role, the role that I'm currently in at the moment. So created the role of like a chief resilience officer and people to work on kind of wider drinking risk, the sort of more upstream aspects and the factors of risk. And so we were also, and so we were, we had that actually provided, which was helpful, which was, people to actually pay attention to it, but we still lacked kind of a statutory framework. The UK finally started to take a kind of more positive strategic direction on this around 2022. I think it was at the end of 2022, we launched the UK's Resilience Framework. And in there, you start to hear, you know, some of the phrases that I've heard people using so far, a whole of society approach to resilience and that kind of coherence and collaboration and integration across policy areas. And luckily, that came with a little bit of funding for local resilience forums, including London's. But a lot of those local resilience forums were already struggling because they didn't really have any staff anyway. We were lucky in London that we were able to start to put together a program to try to address some of the issues that we see and some of the things that we've heard already. So we've started to try to put in place so community engagement programs with the whole kind of purpose of making those connections. Like we just heard Shigeo talk about between kind of our statutory responders and the people on the ground, you know, so we've been providing, you know, participatory funding for organizations to get them involved in sort of those discussions around tables. We've created a London Communities Emergencies Partnership. We've helped to fund that, which effectively helps to be the umbrella organization that sits around the table at a strategic coordination meeting when there's, you know, a major incident, that helps to get aid out to people, that helps to coordinate kind of response, that helps to think about the recovery and getting, you know, mental health support and other types of support to people. They also provide kind of training in advance to communities and faith sector organizations and others to try to get people thinking about those resilience issues. So we've done quite a bit of that work. We've worked with equalities organizations. We've done a bit of research with equalities organizations, trying to think about how do they want to be involved? How can their kind of sectors be involved with, you know, some of the resilience planning and the resilience practice? So we're kind of trying to move in, you know, in a direction of, you know, being more participative, being more considerate of people and communities. But I think we're still, you know, in a place where the ability to do that kind of depends on, you know, very unstable funding situations and very unstable resource. And so it's a problem, but, and I still kind of look at the kind of upstream kind of decision making that is driving our risk. And it makes me feel slightly desperate at times, but it's really nice actually to be in a conversation here and to see, you know, the data that you showed and, you know, and to hear these conversations. And when Ilan asked the question, you know, earlier, is this, you know, is Sendai relevant? I guess for me, the thing is, if it's making us continue to have a conversation like this, then yeah, because we need to be making the points every chance we get. I think I'll probably just leave it there.
Our third and final speaker for this evening, Dr. Miwako Kitamura. She is a very good friend of ours. I'm saying ours because she is a friend of our department and friend of UCL. She's been supporting us in many initiatives, and one of the key initiatives is the internship program. So we have had successful internship program with Tohoku University, and she is the key support for that. And there are lots of initiatives that we are working with the Tohoku University, and Miwako has been the key for that as well. So Miwako is a research fellow at Tohoku University, and she is a senior fellow at the Sasakawa Foundation USA. She specializes on gender and disaster with a focus on social vulnerability, women's leadership, and community-driven resilience. So it is a great pleasure to introduce you, Miwako, and hand it over to you for your remarks. You have about 7 minutes. Thank you.
So thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. And try to something very short things. And have you heard about what is Sendai Gap? And the Sendai Gender Action Plan is a global framework designed to support the implement of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction by UN Women, because we already know that after 10 years, we need more things. That's why we try to something to development more things, because we just creating like framework, it doesn't change. It's because we are human beings, we do something, because we two of them has already explained that we are to see the reality, what's happening in the ground as well. So this is the Sendai Gap into grants. The plan outlined 9 key objectives: improve the information, apply the gender analysis, and mainstream gender equality, and empower women's leadership, and the participation of the disaster risk in the governance, and integrate the gender equality into disaster risk informed, and of course investment. We need fund, otherwise it's very difficult to do that in stable conditions. We already know that kind of painful things. Of course, we have we really want to change something, but we unfortunately for recently our world, we need some power and political issues and also the money as well. So plan and invest the gender responsible recovery and reconstruction progress as well, and ensure sexual and productivity health right as well. This is the pillar of the Sendai Gap in the grants. So I would like to explain something like in a field. This is one of example I'm supported for the disaster children and also the single mother. What actually happened during the disaster, Great East Japan spread, they are very isolated. They have no relationship with neighbors, and they are absolutely no infrastructure, no electricity. It's extremely severe situation. Now the Professor Tatsuki has explained that the Japanese government trying to create it like evacuation, the private funds. Now I'm supporting them to create the plan. However, so many problems we are facing because she is single mother and living 2 of them, extreme fear about something like harassment for the neighbors, and also they fear something to discriminate from the neighbors as well. Of course, we need some evacuation plan for them. However, at the same time, we have to protect for the dignity for their safety as well. And we are struggling with something to how could possibly to share the information to the neighbors as well. However, we try to connect it outside and the neighbors, the communities to get to know about them. So this kind of approach we need it. Of course, it takes time. Of course, it's something we need some cost as well. However, we definitely needed some kind of slow approach and also to creating the trust for the neighbors and the community as well. So I would like to just a short story about the North earthquake. It recently occurred. And after the earthquake, once a month, I visited the community shelter, the Noto place. You can see the extremely damaged buildings. It was severe, really severe the situation. 14 years after the Great East Japan earthquake, it's kind of shocking as a researcher for disaster. It hasn't been changed. It's not been changing, especially the shelter setting and severe situation for especially elderly people. And also caregivers, mostly caregivers, but mandatory in the moment. And of course, everyone struggling at the disasters. So this is for sure the Sendai Framework. It's a very good framework. However, it doesn't work in the field. So this is something my conclusion. And applying Sendai Gap to North earthquake, the gender change in the North. It's lack of data. Still, we are talking about lack of data. Needed disaggregated data on women, elderly, and disabled in the shelters. However, I totally understood because we have to protect their safety as well. And invisible care work, elderly women, both brought the caregiver tasks, mostly unpaid. And also very strong, and also this is negative impact after the disaster, the recovery phase that Professor Tatsuki already explained. And also leadership gap, the less than the 10% of disaster leadership were women. So it's still very low, even 40 years after the Great Japan earthquake. So recommendation for the not recovery, what we need, collect the gender disaggregated data for the future planning and established the women support mechanism in the shelters and empowerment of women leaders in the reconstruction committees as well, and include sexual and reproductive health service in recovery effort. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it really brings to the fore how individuals are affected, but the possible differences that we can make, whether it's through Sendai, through the work which we do in other ways. So thank you so much again to our panel, and we're now happy to open it up to the audience for questions. If not, then Poonam and I can send you questions.
And we have about 45 minutes for Q&A, so that's really a brilliant, really good amount of time.
Yeah, well, back and we'll come.
And so Shigeo Tatsuki, I'm an urban resilience expert. Worked in the field for disasters and working with the UN organizations, trained as a gender person as well. And whenever I see the word data, a desegregated data is always associated with collecting the data number of women, elderly, disabled. But there are other gender realities that get erased just because we are mentioning only women. This is just a comment, and I just need to know whether, when you're talking about the gender action plan, what are the considerations to accommodate the other gender identities? And I do know that there are these protection issues when we bring those kind of data on the forefront. Are those limitations, especially where other gender identities are social taboo or can puts them at risk? But in my experience on the field, which is mostly global south, I have recognized and realized that just by doing this and putting most of the time in the field offices, other gender identities will be put into disability. And that is where my real problem is with all these frameworks and policies. So I needed to know what is from your opinion, how do we approach this? Fact.
I can say a little bit about oh, sorry.
Let's hear it.
Thank you. Oh, great. Well, thanks for the question. I think, as you were asking that, it got me thinking about this, and I think London's an extremely data-rich city, so I think we're quite good at collecting data around things, but I'm not sure how good we are in terms of doing that around sort of disasters. I think we do it. It's just not something I'm all that well cited on, but I was just thinking in terms of gender, it's a question I need to go back and ask. Like I said, we're about to set up inequalities, sort of an advisory panel type of group for our resilience forum. And I think hopefully that'll come up in these conversations, in terms of like, how then do we best work, to understand the issues for different people and what do we do about it? So we're hoping, I've written down the question and I'm going to bring it to my colleagues.
Okay. When people in the disaster risk reduction field say data, usually that means aggregated data. But in order to be inclusive, what we really need is disaggregated data, individual based. And the problem of gender or sexuality, the old, even disaggregated individual based data set has only two values for the gender. So it is very, very difficult to compare or to move on. So that means in this particular field of gender sexuality, we always suffer from the lack of ample data set. But we just have to start from somewhere. And general framework, gender action plan framework would ensure the collection of right type of data set, individualized, disaggregated data set. So we have to start from somewhere. And, critiquing is one thing, but I'm in the field of implementing and solving issues. So let us start and have more generalizable categorization of the identities of individuals.
Thank you for the question. I also started with the LGBTQ communities in Japan, especially I try to their like dignity and their identity because sometimes they appear to discriminate other population. So especially though the not outbreak has occurred, I connected with as soon as I connected the organization to whatever I can support. We try to open the like hotline 24 hours help hotline like call center. We actually received only 2 call from outside of the site, and they just worry about that confuse so many information like SNS. They're like LGBTQ people as like they're very weird or some kind of things. So I remember that of course, we need LGBTQ plus issues. This something they counted for because we need evidence to support them, to help them. But I realized that in the case of study of an earthquake, they doesn't want to show at all. So in that case, however, we need the data and we really want to protect them. And also at the same time, we have to be extremely sensitive to the issue as well. Thank you very much for the question.
I'm Hannah. I'm a geography undergraduate student, but hoping to do a master's in disaster management. This is sort of more directed to you, Kristen, firstly. And do you think you sort of touched on it, but do you think the sector's placed more emphasis on equity after Grenfell? And then on a more broader level, do you think there's a solution to combat the lack of interest in the prioritization of finances and like the money aspect to sort of stop the governments caring so much about that and prioritizing the Sendai Framework?
Yeah, so I think the first question, I mean, yeah, it's difficult. I mean, like I said, I was working in climate adaptation previously, so I haven't been in disaster for long, like in resilience kind of as a whole thing for longer. But it does seem to me that, you know, Grenfell did focus some minds on, you know, the need to be thinking about this a little bit more than the need to be thinking about disaster risk reduction. But we'd also had, you know, other inquiries, other kinds of reports and reviews and things that were consistently saying that we had, you know, specific issues that were raised here by my 2 panelists as well. So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's about time really. And the other question was about, sorry, what was it? Finance?
Yeah, how to sort of like stop the governments caring too much about finances and focus more on the
right.
side
Yeah,
of it.
sorry.
That would be like grants or something like that.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's a really difficult one and one that I think is far, far above my kind of area of ability to answer. I mean, I feel like it's a cultural shift that we kind of need. I mean, we've really gotten to a point where we sort of accept that decision-making happens in a certain way, that actually, you know, that fiscal responsibility is the thing that's paramount among everything. And we've stopped believing in the idea of society, and that's, yeah, I'm not sure what you do about that. And I'm sorry, because I don't necessarily have an answer, but I mean, I think the work we're trying to do about building connections between communities and local authorities is our answer to that, just to try to like at least try to, you know, get people into that space where maybe they're not so isolated. Maybe, you know, we can actually get to the communities that we know are going to be particularly at risk when certain types of things happen or when certain people are targeted and that type of thing.
I'm Pippi. I studied the global humanitarian studies last year. I graduated. My question was more directed to you. I find the question very fascinating in regards to, it seems to me that the further we break big terms down in groups of people, the more accurate data we get. And it seems like the more individualized data we get, the more specific information we have, and from that we build better because it's more individualized. So my question was more tailored towards you in terms of, do you think that the term gender should be broken down? That we talk about women in recovery and disaster preparation and mitigation. It sounded like you were suggesting that we broke this down even further because we would have better data from that. Whereas I felt the response was we should work with what we have, which is that it's already so difficult to gather information. But then between two experts, I wanted to kind of understand this. Are we trying to deal with what we have, which is already difficult, or is maybe the step to break it down even further? Because I thought that would be an interesting debate, because right now we're at a place where it's so difficult to deal with what we have because we're lacking information. But from what I heard from, I'm so sorry, I forgot your. So from what I got from that question was that actually maybe we should keep going with the breaking down of the concept of gender.
Sure, let's go to Sylvia and then
Quite, yeah. Can you guys hear me? Yes. It's quite interesting. I think this is one way to look at it, but over and over again, it's been 20 years that I've been working in the international development and humanitarian aid, and every time the word gender is used, it is only being used as a sabotage word, and it's only focusing on women most of the time. I have just finished my research with the Gender Justice Security Hub, and there were 37 projects, and most of the projects were only looking about the status of women. There were only 5 or 10 projects out of it, which was looking into other gender identities. So my concern, and I'm being very critical about the field and the practitioners, when we talk about these data, we have to be very particularly, just have a disclaimer. So under the umbrella of gender, what are we looking at? So that the other identities are not erased, one. B, yes, perhaps this is another way of looking at it, that you bifurcate and you have these further down categories during the data collection, and especially when it is disaster, it's very difficult. And like I said, in the areas where it is a security issue and a protection issue, I have experienced spaces, and as lived experience as well, where other identities are told to adopt to either of the binary, so that it safeguards them. But in the process of doing so, we are doing more disaster, we are doing basically erasure. And that's my learning of 20 years. And I don't really know what is the real approach should be. However, it's very important to recognize our limitations and have a disclaimer always. So not just using gender, just a blanket thing, because it is then representing all gender. There are almost 19 definitions of gender identities so far, and others are being recognized. But how and where would one draw the line? So it's just that being conscious is very important. And being conscious of not to erase other identities, I think that's my submission here.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point. And this argument reminds me the similar situation in disability studies. For many years, since 1980, when the International Classification of Disabilities was released from WHO, it relied on so-called medical model. And this scheme requires the practitioners to identify which part of impairment this individual suffers or mental function. And then it forced practitioner to break down people's impairment in many, many different categories. Then, I believe 2001 or so, International Classification of Functioning came. And it completely changed the way the issues should be handled. Rather than the impairment, what is most important aspect is who is responsible for the disinterest in this particular individuals. Then shift was made to so-called social model of disability. Within this framework, it doesn't matter what kind of impairment, or, it is not as important as what should society accommodate to particular necessity of an individual. So your question just inspired me. Probably the similar kind of argument would apply here. Rather than focusing too much on the individuality or identity, we should pay more attention to what society should accommodate to this particular person in the disaster risk reduction field. Could be self-care, could be communication. If we shift to the category of the societal responses, maybe we could come up with more implementable solutions.
Yeah, thank you for the Professor Tatsuki. That's why we're working together. It's because disabled people, the consideration and LGBTQ plus issues somehow is quite similar because the past we try to something identify the kind of the sexual identity exists is extremely complicated. So many variety of the kinds. So, and then we had a discussion with Professor Tatsuki, how it's creating a barrier to access to what they needed. And for instance, the kind of people that sometimes need for the hormone treatment, even the disaster, they have to continue. Some people need for the AIDS treatment to continue. However, at the same time, they fear to discriminate. So that case, I understood that what is a barrier to access their what needed. And thank you for the very good discussion, Bibi.
Thank you. This is a really rich discussion, and I don't want to take it away from this, but I thought could I ask another question based on the presentation you gave, which is that it seems like what you're highlighting are long-standing vulnerabilities, whether it's to do with housing or whether it's to do with single carers or single mothers. And I just, in the region where I work, which is the Bengal Delta, what often happens is that the pot of money for disaster comes from some of these other departments, say of health or housing. And so unfortunately, some of the issues that you highlighted, which, the people that were most vulnerable, say in an event of a disaster and hazard, were those who were already marginalized and vulnerable. And so I think what I'm asking is, how can we deal with the issue that in the event of a hazard, actually, when those same pots of money are sort of taken away from exactly what one wants to strengthen, but then towards a disaster, actually the longer goal of strengthening those issues goes away because there's sort of new pots of climate resilience, or there's new pots of money coming for disaster reduction, but they're actually coming from things that need to be addressed. And actually, that's what your research was showing so beautifully, that it is actually the long-standing vulnerabilities that affected most to those people. And so that was one question as to how does one, square that. And then if I could, just because of the other sort of conversation that's been happening is on scale. So I'm a social anthropologist, and you've talked about disaggregated data a lot. And I just wondered in terms of, if we were to go really into the micro data of households and then disaggregate within households even, how does one deal with the scale of the issue, and how, economists are good with big data sets, but usually anthropologists aren't taken seriously because we deal with such small scales. And yet that's the most crucial, significant data, as we're trying to say. And just one last comment about the gender, which is that we can't forget the dynamic that gender, as feminist scholars have been saying, is a dynamic with men. And so patriarchy is as crucial to sort of look at that interplay of women and men and other identities as well, which we can't just be studying women, but in the interplay of their interactions. But thank you so much.
Okay. May I start with your second question? Because I'm a sociologist and biased in a sociological thinking. there's such a thing called sociological imagination.
Mhm.
That is to equate personal calamity or trouble with structural, historical public issues. And this imagination, and I'm pretty sure anthropologists does the same. So you see the structural issues within an individual. So it's really up to how you frame or how you sort of upgrade of recognizing things as a personal trouble or to the public issues. So that kind of relationship, the dual foci of the issues probably is needed. That's my response to your question. And I think we share everybody in the disaster risk reduction field. We are dealing with troubled individuals that we are trained to see the root cause why this particular person is suffering. So I say sociological imagination, and anthropologists will probably have another, nice term. With regard to your first question, could you please summarize your first question?
Just in terms of the funding,
Yeah, okay. So what Japan did in the most recent, what soon to be amended in Disaster Countermeasure Basic Act is mainstreaming social services within disaster risk reduction. So there's no two separate entities. For the first time, when the Disaster Relief Act, it's been stated that it was not stated, but it has been handled for many years by the Ministry of Welfare that handled the disaster relief. Until recently, it has moved to the Cabinet Office to deal with the issues. And then siloization started. So in order to sort of break down these silos, social service silos and disaster risk reduction silo, what Japan is going to do is to cross over so that you have a budget from two different entities. And if you see social services from disaster risk reduction perspective, it is a mitigation to deal with the fundamentally disadvantaged people. Those people are dealt with by the social service entity. So mitigation. So crossover to different entities. And then usually the way we see things defines and limit how we should solve the issues. So it is always, good to have a critical thinking. And then that will open up the different way to frame the things. Thanks.
Yeah, I would just say probably on that, I guess that was the first question. I think we've become really good at kind of running after, when we see that suddenly there's an influx of funding or budgets for, particular issues, because suddenly this is what government or whoever has gotten interested in, kind of good at sort of flexing and suddenly turning to kind of reframe the stuff that we talk about. But one of the things that my team is there to do in London is to try to promote that integration across different policy areas, recognizing that there are a lot of policy and program areas that we have in London, as a strategic authority that are already delivering resilience. So there's like public health programs and cost of living programs and all sorts, social and health inequalities programs and things like that. So we're trying to actually make sure that those are taking the opportunities that they can and trying to achieve some sort of coherence across those policy areas and understand where there might be conflicts between them and try to resolve that type of thing. Yeah, I think that's kind of the way we try to do that and sort of ensure in that way that we can align budgets where possible to get things done. And try to also understand where the opportunities might be. So where we're, creating a new strategy or plan or major funding kind of program or something like that. Can we incorporate an element there that, make sure that we're at least not like maladapting and not, causing more problems than there already are, but actually thinking about the resilience aspects of that. So it's one of those things that we're sort of in there kind of trying to do and kind of punching away at that all the time.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lily. I'm visiting from Canada briefly here, so really excited to be here tonight. I work as a manager for resilience for 3 municipalities and 2 First Nations. So we're trying to piece together a strategy, bringing very different First Nations values versus kind of municipal values. And I'm also a research associate working with Indigenous single moms and evacuations in particular. So I spend a lot of time some time, I guess, with Margareta Wallström, who was the woman who led the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. And if we look at it now from the kind of historical perspective, back then when it was started to be drafted, it was very different era. So today, what we're seeing, the kind of the climate data that was projected, we are 10, 15 years out, right? The impacts are here now that we didn't anticipate until much later. She really wanted to put the connection between disasters and armed conflict. That didn't go in. That's here today, right? We have resource wars. It's happening today. We have trade wars, right? So the landscape really changed. So the question is, how useful are these aspirational big frameworks at a local level? And if they're not useful, then what can even, outside of chasing the next grant and fads and words, what's really useful to build long-term resilience on the ground?
Again, I am a sort of a implementation-oriented scientist. It is okay to critique, there's always a room, but I care about people who die from the calamities. And if Sendai Framework provide any assistance to come up with or solidifying the solutions, I welcome them. And as I shared with you, because of the Sendai Framework, 2021 Disaster Countermeasure Basic Act was possible. That demanded every single of the municipalities, which is more than 1,700 in Japan, to create individualized evacuation plan. And then priorities were given to the most vulnerable in terms of the hazard and in terms of the functioning and in terms of the social isolation level. And within 5 years, municipalities are expected to come up with some results. And that kind of a drastic amendment was possible, partly because Japan committed to the 2015 Sendai Framework. And similarly, the current amendment, soon to become the new law, is to include social services within disaster risk reduction. So there is a use. It's not like it solves everything, but it does the job, at least in the context of Japan. So let's have a hope.
Yeah, thank you for the question. At the first beginning, when I saw the Sendai Framework, I thought that quite similar idea as you, because I always working with the very local level. And then I thought that the government doesn't want to know what exactly happened on the field. However, I have been working with it both sides. I understand we still have a gap. However, if you're using the Sendai Framework, it has been working for 10 years. Of course, it's not perfect at all. That's why we need more development. And however, without Sendai Framework, probably we might not find the problem. And I mean, the governmental people, they never ever understand what exactly happened in the field. And especially for the social vulnerability individual, it's sometimes very difficult to find. Like people who are like single mother and disabled people, and some of them are locked down in their homes. And it's very difficult, even the neighbor, to find out them. That kind of issue is, we still have it. That's why we need together to work and so many like interdisciplinary research that we needed. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have, 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe if we take the 4 questions and then go to the panel for closing. So please.
Hello. Hi. Sorry. Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a PhD student in geography. I'm studying citizen science and climate risk management. My question is not about that, but it's a bit related to it, in the sense that I'm studying transdisciplinary processes, and I wonder, how do you see the evolution of the integration into a higher level in international agendas? It could be the CCA or disaster risk reduction or sustainable development, or the intersection of that, of the local expertise. Namely, you mentioned the volunteer organizations, but it could also be the local governments who maybe are not directly working within disaster risk, but they have environmental plans that are dealing with some issues that we understand as disaster risk from a disciplinary perspective. So my question, I want to know from your perspective, especially considering that we are talking about the science policy interface and the implementation, how do you see the evolution, and if it's shaping something or maybe changing the way we frame the issues? Because I'm concerned about the effort put in the models, social or environmental or climate models, when we are dealing with communities that maybe know a bit more about the issues in the front line.
Thank you for all of the presentation. My name is Mao, and I'm doing my master's degree with all of them. And I came from Japan. And my question is about Japanese policies. For me, it sounds like all of society approaches kind of comfortable words, especially in SFDRR, because there is no practical information about how to engage communities or civil societies in terms of governance. And as Professor Tatsuki showed, the Sendai City did really well to support the single households by providing disaster case management, like personalizing the support. But I think Sendai City is a very large city. It can welcome the large international conference to launch this framework. But as a person who came from really small village, I think especially in Japan, there are many municipalities with very limited financial resources and also human resources. So I think, all of society approach is quite crucial, but at the same time, I think allocating resources is really important. So this is my opinion, and my question is about, since I think we have Professor Egawa, who is professional for disaster care and medic things, and I think individual evacuation plan can be utilized for not only disaster preparation, but also mitigate the indirect fatalities after the disaster, like monitoring the health health issues and social isolation as well. So I want to hear more about very cutting knowledge from you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Anna. I'm a PhD student at the Department for Risk and Disaster Reduction here. Thank you so much for your presentation because the results were very clear, outlining how persons with disabilities, other societal vulnerabilities are the root causes of disasters. I'm wondering, as researchers, how do you ensure what you found is embedded into policy and practice? And do you even consider it as researchers as part of your duties to make sure that they translate into policy and practice? And I guess the other side of the coin, from the perspective of the Greater London Authority, what role do you think evidence and research has in informing what's happening on the ground and in terms of policy? Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Stel. I'm a third year of the Global Humanitarian Service course, and I was wondering for the panel, because free inequalities matter on disaster response, relating specifically to gender-based violence, should shelters seek to structurally tackle gender violence that occurs not just in the days following the disaster, but also in the long term? Because in the months following the greatest Japanese earthquake, from what I understand, there were still some people that were in the shelters. So how can support mechanisms tackle gender-based violence in this long-term focus?
Feel free to respond to any question.
Okay.
Don't have to respond to all of it. Maybe each one, you can take one question each, or maybe, yeah.
Because for the time limitation, I would like to answer for the Tails question. And for the evacuation shelter, we at the kind of shocking, we see the reality for the North earthquake because we have been trying to develop it more comfortable for everyone since after the Great Japan earthquake. And however, it has been not developed for comfortable for the old people. It's in the gender perspective. It's not only the woman, of course, the men as well. It's privacy and also the safety for the going to the very basic like sanitary things. It hasn't been developed. And of course, there's a very crucial situation for them, especially for the road condition. It's of course lots of volunteers would like to support them. However, the infrastructure has damaged by earthquakes. So and also the weather was very severe, the snow, the covering for the road. That kind of things was, of course, we pretty understanding for any kind of scenario we have already developed. However, even though we have lack of understanding of the situation, how to reach to the evacuation center. And also if I understand some story has discovered after the 40 years after the Great East Japan earthquake, some woman husband has started for the story about his wife has actually victimized for the shelter as sexual violence. So this kind of issues, it's very long time to recover, and we have to, of course, something to change. However, of course, the same things happen. The information collection is we need very privacy and sensible for the older people. Of course, we're struggling with that, so many things. That's why we have to work together. Thank you.
Just say a little bit about the link between policy and practice and policy and research. I think, yeah, I mean, it's hugely important for the work that we do at the GLA. I think, we can't really implement or even start to draft new policies until we know we have that evidence to do that. And I think in the program that I've been doing around community resilience, that's all been kind of underpinned by small but pretty tight research projects that we've done, looking at the roles of neighborhood networks, looking at the roles of equalities organizations, we're doing one currently on migrant-led organizations. So just trying to understand how best to involve people in the kind of practice that we have. I think, events like this are pretty good in terms of just sort of demonstrating how we try to do that, try to have, good relationships with the academic partners that we know, and so that we can try to help make sure that, the research that as it's even being conceived is actually going to be helping to meet actual real world needs rather than just, filling knowledge gaps potentially. So we're really, really grateful to have the relationships that we do with colleagues here and across the country as well to try to help out with our, supporting our policies. And we're really appreciative of the fact that that researchers want to do that.
I will answer the second and third questions. Yes, the shelter situation is pretty bad. And the fundamental reason is because there are 1,700 municipalities and the municipal office administrator who is in charge of shelters. It's their first time and maybe the last time in their professional career. In Japan, for up until now, the running the shelters were mandated to the local government. They don't know nothing. And very green. And the current amendment proposal is to introduce voluntary sector. And with the amendment, it will become possible to grant the shelter management to professional voluntary sector personnel. Then it doesn't matter whether municipality is small, because nationwide we have like a NGO like Peace Wind Japan that has been doing humanitarian work all over the world. So incorporating all of the society approach is one solution. And so this answers Mao's question. And then disaster case management was practiced in Sendai City for long-term recovery, housing recovery. What is being proposed is there is a room for emergency and short-term disaster case management. And that can be also handled by voluntary sectors. Yeah, thank you.
With this, we are about to finish this evening with wonderful remarks from our speakers. Thank you so much to all of the speakers for your wonderful intervention and enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for all your questions from gender, not being just women, but also recognizing other gender categories, gender being relational, and that's when the conversation about patriarchy comes in, impacting also men, not just women. Thank you so much for the question about whether these sort of frameworks are even useful, whether we should have it at all, or we should just get rid of it and do something else that is more effective. But then these tools are, even though it looks like it doesn't help, it is not doing anything, but it actually can be a really useful tool for the local activists and government who use this as like for advocacy and putting pressure through their government and international community. This is something that gives them a talking point, start the conversation. So when the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was adopted in 2015, there was this subtle kind of assumption that gender is part of it. Yeah, we are talking about inclusive DRR. There is 2 places in Sendai Framework for DRR where they mention inclusion. There is 1 place where they mention women. There is nothing about gender in there. But 9 years down the line, in 2023, they adopted Sendai Gender Action Plan, Sendai Gap, that Miwako was talking about. It is another thing to really ask the local government to see how much progress they have made, but at least we are there now, and we might be able to make some difference and some progress. Also, there was a question about lots of our programs goes with the funding. Whenever there is funding, we just use those terms and then it goes. So therefore, in our department, we have a module called Gender, Disaster and Conflict. In that module, we talk about gender, disaster and conflict being continuum. It's not just one or the other, it's a continuum. So if we look at the whole situation as a continuum, we might be able to address lots of problems that we discussed today. So thank you so much. And we have drinks there and some snacks Please enjoy the drink and also take the opportunity to network with each other and also ask further questions to our speakers. Thank you so much.